Well, welcome to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and I'm going to be your host for another UNCORK conversation. Today, I have the privilege of connecting with a friend of mine who, Lenore, I was doing the math. We've known each other for 36 years,
I know.
which seems impossible because that means I probably met you before you were born. That's a strong possibility, Lenore. I mean, 36 years. When people talk like that when I was young, I thought they were ancient or dead or almost dead, but apparently not so much anymore. It's amazing how time flies, isn't it?
Sure is. Yep.
It's
Having to
great.
reckon with that passage.
No, 100%. And so today I want to introduce you to my listeners. I am so looking forward to this conversation. It's been months in the planning since we first talked about this, and I really believe that the conversation that we're going to find today is going to be it's going to be transformative. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be unique, and I really have a strong sense that as we move into 2021 from the season that we've been in, that we're all looking for different ways to encounter our own lives. And I believe that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you, my friends, my listeners, Lenore Walker. Lenore, as I said, has been a friend of mine since for 36. I'm going to say 1900. That's a long time ago. That must have been your past life.
In the 80s sometime.
I know, in the 80s. It was 80, I think it was 82, around
Yeah.
82, 83.
I think so.
And
Yeah.
my wife was a friend of Lenore's before I met Lenore, but that was 36 years ago. And here's how I want to sum up and introduce Lenore to you today. Lenore is a creator. She creates things. She's a maker. And at times, probably a little bit of a mystic somehow melded into that. Lenore, you're an artist, you're an art educator, you're a trained art psychotherapist, you are an art therapist, you're an instructor in introductory Jungian psychology at the Toronto Art Therapy Institute. I mean, I could go on. And when I introduce you that way, sometimes I think, oh, no, come on, no, this can't be. This is just Lenore. This is just my friend. But you have done so many things in those last 36 years, and you have found yourself in the midst of it. You have redefined yourself. You have got tremendous training over the years. And through that, the one thing I know in my connection, our recent reconnection, is that it's clear to me that you have this wonderful understanding of creativity and contemplation and how this all works together. You are a brilliant and thoughtful woman. That is absolutely from my perspective. And if people were ever looking you up on social media, they're going to find you at lenorewalker.com. I know your hashtags are things like educate, encourage, empower, all strong words about, I think, what's important to you. And I know that you believe, just from talking to you and looking at what you do, that you have this sense that images are somehow, I don't know, they're miracles of the present moment that provide wisdom and
Yeah.
and meaning for daily living with ourselves and with others and with the wider world that we encounter. And so with that introduction, of course, as my listeners know, all good conversations, all great conversations begin with a drink. And today we've decided to deliver differently. Normally it's an alcoholic drink, but since we're recording this at 9:38 in the morning on a Monday morning, we've decided to forego the alcohol in case people would talk. And instead, we are having a coffee together. So I cheers to you, my friend.
Yeah. Cheers.
Excellent.
Some
I've got,
Balzac's
yeah,
winter blend, but in
ha,
my favorite cup.
nice. What is it? Winter blend? What's that?
Yeah, it's called Winter Blend. You can get it at Balzac's Coffee Roasters.
Oh, there you go.
I
We
am
got an ad.
so
We got,
fortunate.
I hope I get an advertising gig after this one.
I'm
I,
so fortunate because there's one literally a block and a half around the corner from this sweet little place I live.
That's
So,
awesome. That's awesome. Well,
mhm,
I made myself a very nice latte with my Nespresso machine, and I love the Nespresso machine
beautiful,
for sure. So,
beautiful.
all right, let me
Well, we
just
could have put a shot of Bailey's in it,
we
but
could have
it's
no.
still too early in the morning for
Well,
me.
it's not too early, and no one would have known if you don't tell them. So now my secret's out. Come on now. All right, listen. Let me kick this off with a quick story, and this is something a very powerful story for me in my experience with Lenore over the years. And I've told my listeners in the past that I believe everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs some help, and everybody should have a therapist. And there was a season in my life where I was dealing, this was probably 30 years ago, maybe, or so. I was really beginning to deal with some complex problems, issues, call them issues, I like issues better, problems in my life in relationship to just struggling with anger and some different things that were going on emotionally for me. And my wife and I had connection with Lenore at that time. And Lenore, as she was brailing out sort of her career as a therapist and what she was going to do, which is far before you had really had a lot of formal training,
Yeah.
but yet you had a gift. And I remember, I won't get into the details, obviously specific of the session, but I remember having a conversation with you, and I was talking about some of the impact of my experience with my father and some of the things, how that affected me both positively and negatively. And I remember there was a poignant moment in one of the conversations we were having where you asked me to describe what I would consider or characterize as one of the most painful experiences that I had had with my father. And I remember so I began to talk about it, and it came out, and there was no emotion at all. It didn't touch me in any way. It was very matter of fact. It was very clinical. And I remember after I did that, you said to me something very interesting. You said, "Here's a piece of paper and a pen. Would you do me a favor? Could you just write what you said?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, okay, fair enough." And I remember it was so powerful because the moment my pen touched the paper and I began to write, it was like that pen pricked something deep inside my soul. And the raw emotion that erupted from me immediately, only seconds ago having said the same thing, and it didn't impact me at all. And all of a sudden, when pen hit the paper to write, it did something different in me. And I remember that the emotion was overwhelming and so powerful. And it was very clear to me today that something was happening, that something different was happening from recounting it by voice, by my words, and in my head maybe. And all of a sudden, it was touching me differently. And I don't even know if you fully remember that time or not, but I can tell you, Lenore, it was transformative to me. It was the beginning of a lot of great things for me in my life. And maybe even before you had all the tools and all of the right understandings, I believe that you had a gift to connect me with something that I needed to connect with so that I could become more whole in my life. And so I want to thank you for that experience. And maybe those were the beginning days, the embers of the gift that has become what you do. I don't know, when you think about, as I recount that, what comes to your mind? What was going on for me that day? I mean, you probably have better language for it today, but what was going on?
Well, it's really funny because I didn't remember that until you shared it with me. And I was shocked when we first were talking pre-session here about it, because I thought, oh my goodness, you would never do that therapeutically these days because you're triggering trauma, to ask the question so directly. And yet, in the way things work, in that kind of mysterious way that human connection works, it was okay. And there was some kind of safety there. Maybe the real issue was there was trust,
Hmm.
that I could somehow hold the space in such a way that that powerful emotion could be addressed, and I'm a real believer in the fact that all healing happens in the context of really good, solid relationship.
Hmm.
And so that friendship base was the foundation. So that question could be asked safely. But I think as I reflect on it, I realize that without totally having all of the skill sets, that because there's been something attuned in my own soul, I knew that intuitively somehow that you're being able to connect with an instrument and paper as a substrate was maybe going to be helpful to connect on a soul level with the suffering, and really that's a type of compassionate inquiry. And what I know now is that when we write, it is a type of narrative therapy. I mean, we've turned a lot of these natural things into therapies because we have to somehow justify them. But these are the natural ways that human beings work out their challenges. And I think for you, what happened there were a couple things. One was the picking up of the utensil and then meeting the substrate is what we know now as body-based awareness.
Hmm.
And when there is trauma that might be expressed as deep anger, we know that the brain or the mind has a difficult time thinking through it. and that really what works is a body-based approach, because it's a side doorway or a backdoor gentle way of being able to assist a person in connecting with the place where they feel disconnected and where the suffering is and what might reconnect them. And I think now, as I look back on that, that's what actually happened for you. And really my job was simply in that time, because I had this pastoral background at the time, to hold the space. I really did understand what it meant to companion someone as they were struggling through a personal challenge or dilemma, because I was trained for that particular job role and intuitively equipped to be able to come alongside people, simply because I knew that really worked for me. And so that encouragement, that little bit of kind of teaching, educative and empowering presence allows people to connect with that place that they can locate their inner counselor, coach, or therapist themselves. But we do need somebody sometimes to be the person who is the one who almost creates that safety and holds that safety, so that whatever needs to happen there can happen. And that's really, I think, the heart of therapy. It's to
Well,
come alongside. That's actually what it means in the Greek, is to come alongside.
It's interesting as you talk, because I'm having this picture, and again, this is not the right clinical language, I'm sure, but it's almost like that. That pen became like a scalpel, not a knife, because a knife sounds different. A scalpel and a knife are the same thing. It's just the intention of the one who uses it on you. But it's like that knife became a scalpel that cut me deep enough to land something in me. And I will say this, Lenore, that although I have definitely not overcome in that particular area all the time in my life, I would want to say to you, just publicly, that my family is a better family because of that moment in time. My relationship with my wife is better. My relationship with my kids are better because of that. And on a grand redemptive scale, I believe that started something and continues something that it took me to a moment in time where I came from a fatherless family, and when my son got married, he asked me to be his best man. So, redemption is possible, but it comes through the hard work that's associated with working on ourselves. And so I want to thank you for that moment in time. But that's my experience that we had a long time ago. So, we lost track over the years, and things have gone on as life does, and we've reconnected in the last 6-8 months. But one question I have is, so how did your journey in this area begin? And were there some things in your background that really just inform the way that you think through things and how you look at your choices, how you looked at yourself, your career, what you do? But how's your journey, and how do you get from wherever you've come from to where you are today? What just help us understand that, because that's always fascinating to me.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's so affirming to hear that I helped. In such a profound way, because I think that's the thing we all need to hear. But sometimes, we just continue to walk on and journey on, and we don't always know, the influence and the positive support that we've actually offered. So it's been really nice to hear that story. Even though I'm aware that if I had a clinical supervisor hearing that, they'd think, ooh, she fumbled the ball there a little bit.
Yeah, it's all good.
But it all works out, right?
The fumble worked for me.
The fumble works sometimes, and this is the gift of being human. I think for me, this year has been quite profound, 2020, with the challenges that have been added on to the regular challenges we've been facing as we continue to speed along this, human journey and the development and the consciousness that we're developing, and some of the things we're seeing that are really societally and interculturally distressing. But this has been my year for having to revisit the trauma that I grew up in, and to realize that I actually did grow up in a family I was brought into a family that was riddled with generational trauma. and societal trauma and cultural trauma, and I was not really fully aware of it. That's become even more clear to me, partly because of my training over the years, both in theology as well as an artisan and now as an art therapist, but also just as that kind of expressive mystic, that contemplative. But I'd say the thing that really formed me, quite apart from the family that I was brought into, and probably has been saving my life on a regular basis, but a memory that I did not recollect until about 10 years ago when I actually began my art therapy training. Might have been about 13 years ago when I began. I had a very profound spiritual moment as a very young child that I didn't remember until I was in art therapy supervision. So my own art therapy sessions, because that's what we do as training art psychotherapists. We, surrender ourselves to actually getting into therapy. So we understand what it's like to be in that place as a counselee or a patient coming for support. And out of the blue, one session, I just had a memory as I was speaking with my art therapist and remembered this gorgeous moment that I had as a very young girl. I was sitting at the breakfast table. I might have been about 3 or 4, and I was always the slowest eater, so I was always the last one left at the table. Everyone had gone on to their day. It was breakfast. I remember it being probably a mid-June morning. And of course, I wasn't in school because I was only about 3.5 or 4. And I remember we had this huge picture windows, about very large, about had to be 8 feet by 6 feet, that where the eat-in part of the kitchen was, and the sun was just streaming in. And in the acreage behind our backyard, there was a very old, century-old, large maple tree. It's about 120 years old. And the sun was streaming through the green leaves of this tree, and I looked into the rays of sunlight. And in my little mind, as I reflect back on it, I couldn't have possibly been able to articulate this, but somehow deep inside I knew that I was one with that light, that somehow cosmically there was no separation between that source energy and myself. And it was one of the most loving experiences I've ever had. I felt so safe, so secure, so loved, so right with the world, right with myself. And this is a little child who doesn't have the concepts of abstract thinking, but just knew deep in every cell of my being that I was part of that light, and that as such, I was a carrier and a conveyor, conductor, emanator of that light. And so I forgot that, but at the time when I most needed it, which was about 10 years ago, because I went through a number of life transitions and challenges, none of which I really signed up for, that led me to go back to school. In this art therapy session, I had this recollection, and this has become the sustaining vision of my own journey that has formed me and informed me. And thank goodness, because as I continue to age with a family of origin that is incredibly challenged by various mental health problems, psychological distresses, and just a whole host of life experiences that haven't turned out as positively maybe as they could have, partly by choice and partly just because this is what life deals you as a hand sometimes. I have found that vision to be incredibly consoling, very directing, hugely guiding and encouraging, and a reminder that I have a choice every single day with everything that happens to me, even though I go through the same human hardships and struggles that anybody would, worry, anxiety, despair, that seems to hold me and keep me here and keep me focused. So, that's a long answer to your question, but I would have to say that that is where this kind of mystical child who was very expressive got cared for and got affirmed, was in that golden moment. And so I'm always looking to see how I can be a bringer of light. I don't always succeed at that because I'm human and I have my issues and my moods.
Mm-hmm.
But that really has been, I say, the key moment
Wow.
for me.
Wow. When did art and making things collide with your life? Really young? Was it later on
Really
in
young,
life? Really young.
really young. And I do have to give props to my mother because she was also creative, artistic. She still is. She struggles with that part of her journey, and yet she always made sure there were art materials available for us from a very early age. My first mural experience was in red crayon on her kitchen wall. Didn't go over very well, but it's interesting what I drew because I remember it, and I was creating this artwork with my late sister. At the time, we were creating a mural of the street we lived on, as if we were looking out the other picture window on the other side of the house, out the living room window, the street we lived on, the houses across the road, the trees, the sidewalk, everything. So the landscape of the village that we grew up in really was a key piece of how we made sense of our world. And we were putting that on the kitchen wall,
Interesting.
unfortunately.
Interesting.
Because it's
You
really
know,
regarded.
yeah, and as you talk about this, and this is what I love about the conversations, because there's just these interesting things that happen inside them. But you described an experience where you're a little girl and you're looking out the back window and you're having a powerful experience that you don't remember necessarily later on, but affects you. And then this experience is about turning around to the other side of the house and looking out to the street, which is where the real world is. And it would be nice to live in the forest of light in our lives, but life happens on the street, right? And
Well,
it's an
and I think
interesting metaphor, and just as you
it's
talk
great.
about it, it's very
What an
powerful.
observation. I hadn't seen that before. Thank you, Tim. And I think that for me, the two are incredibly integrated,
Hmm.
because as we go through our conversation today, um, one of the things that really comes together there is the beauty of that kind of incredible connection with nature, the
Hmm.
created world, the light, and how that seamlessly informs the way that we interact. As far as I'm concerned, in my humble opinion, how I can interact in that everyday world. They're
Yeah.
both as real to me as the other, and so there's this kind of dialogue
Hmm.
that the two of them are constantly having. And
Yeah.
I'm living into that, as this maybe bridge.
That's fascinating. So as you look at your journey, so where has this all taken you? I mean, you've done so many different things, and we can't talk about everything today, but you've done so many different things. But where has this journey taken you along the way? What are some of the highlights? Maybe what are some of the lowlights that just in this journey over the years? Because it's been a fascinating journey, I know, for you and talking to you, and it's full of pleasure and full of pain, as all of our journeys are. But where has this taken you, and what things have you encountered as a result of this?
So really where the journey took me, just to sum up where it took me through, growing up, was that I was constantly dealing with distress because there were mental health issues, addiction issues in the home. And there was this constant back and forth, up and down. You just never knew what you were going to deal with from day to day. It's a very stressful, anxiety inducing way for a kid to live and to grow up. And that's common to so many people. So I don't have a different journey in that regard. But what happened was it also was laced with religion because my mother was also very adamantly dedicated to church going every Sunday, very involved. So the spiritual component, while it wasn't maybe spiritual, it was faith based, was very much a part of our weekly experience. And what happened, particularly for my older sister and I, is that we really took that to heart and made that a solace. And so for me, that became turning toward all things definitely spiritual and really going on a quest to find the things that had purpose and meaning for me, even as a young girl. And eventually, where that wound up is that my mother did have what was termed in the late 70s, early 80s, a born again Christian experience. And that kind of spilled out over into the family unit, wasn't very well received. But I did see a significant enough change in her stability that it caused me to consider it. And I went down that road too and wound up studying at Bible college, which is where you and I first met, and then continued on with theological studies and went on and got my Master's of Religious Education at Canadian Theological Seminary, which is now Ambrose University College, a liberal arts college and theological college. And then I went into the pastorate. And it was because I really valued this soul-based approach to life, this contemplative approach to life that really took into account the richness of what a spiritual life could offer you as far as grounding and centering. And that was really connected to that light-filled experience as a little girl with being connected to Source, except now I had a name and it was Jesus. Now that has had its eclectic kind of mixture, because all through college, I kind of had to keep under wraps that really I was what would be termed as a liberal Christian. So here I was in a more fundamentalist, conservative, evangelical faith expression, and I really regard that. But I still was a liberal theologian, so to speak. So I had a bit of a broader picture and take on things. So there's some things that I was always kind of shutting up about and locking down while I was trying to fill that role, the expectations of that role, because this is the way we operate in the world. This is how we figure out how to be. So I got into the pastorate after I graduated, and I was in a very good church, but as happens even in Christian and church communities, there can be mental health issues, dysfunctions, toxic faith issues, and I bumped into some of those. And unfortunately, in my first experience in the ministry, while it had been very good throughout my internships for a few years, I bumped into someone else's mental health issue, and because they were in a significant position of leadership, I had to really shut up and just ride out the challenge and the difficulty where my reputation was being put on the line. And in the end, it all worked out, but in the end, I left that post. And so began a real difficult journey of trying to stay in the Christian pastorate, going to a couple of different churches after that, and realized that that same toxicity, I was bumping into it. And really what I started to encounter is something I now know from the psychology and psychotherapy training that I have, is that so many times when we are grouped in collective units, there are dynamics that really are grounded in dysfunctional family interactions, because many people come to faith looking for healing from that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we actually experience it in those societal, groupings. And what happens there is something that I've come to understand as a betrayal bonding. And it is actually addictive behavior. And no one really likes to talk about that, because we really want to always kind of offset it that God, covers all, mercy covers a multitude of sins. But actually, every day for me, it comes back to you get to choose how you're going to respond to other people. But even more importantly, what you're going to do with what's coming up in you and how not to project it out onto somebody else, but actually deal with your own crap and actually have your crap detectors up about yourself, and being able to take responsibility for your own inner world and how there might be a dissonance in how you express that on the street level. How do you bridge the two windows, the one to the sublime and the one to the very real boots to the ground experience? How are you going to stand on that bridge and actually mediate that, because you do mediate that.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion. Some people
Well,
really don't agree with that,
uh,
but I think that's the way it works.
you know what? And I resonate with that so much because I'd like to blame lots of other things for my crap,
Yep.
and what I've learned over the years is at some point the crap of others becomes my crap. You know, like and I become responsible for it. I'm not responsible that I had certain experiences, negative experiences in my childhood. I'm not responsible directly for those experiences, but I believe, and something a lot of people wouldn't necessarily like this, but I believe I am 100% responsible today for my responses and reactions to those events in my life,
Yeah.
and that's where my ownership has to come. And over the years, I've worked hard, and I work hard every day at identifying my own crap. I'm not always as good as I could. And so, fundamentally, my wife is really great at it. And I raised two children who have significant crap meters. And, and for some reason, it's attenuated to my crap, particularly where even this week, just this week, I had another conversation with my son where he's like, dude, your crap's coming out again. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm 55. I thought I'd have no crap left by the time I got here. And I still have crap, but it's my crap and I'm responsible for it. And some days it's just not even crap. It's just shit. And it's just all that stuff that still resides in my character and in my psyche. And I'm on a journey still. And so
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate your honesty about, that your own journey, because so often I believe, again, we've just conditioned ourselves that we can't talk like this. We can't have honest conversations, and as much as, the majority of people that you're talking about in those church circles, they would espouse to this grand idea that the truth will set them free, but very few people like the truth.
Yeah.
And it's
Hard
hard.
to hear.
And
It's
it's
hard.
hard. Yeah.
It's hard to live with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can't run from it, you can't hide from it. So let me ask you, as you meander through your life and you come through these experiences and you have these experiences, and obviously today we're not going to be able to braille all of the wonderful experiences that you had, and I would just encourage people, again, if they want to get to know you more as a person and understand what you do, I think it's LenoreWalker.com, right?
Yeah,
Pretty
that's
sure.
going through an overhaul. So,
Okay.
you can also try www.lwalker.vpweb.ca, which is my Vistaprint site.
Okay.
And I'm just in the process of kind of retooling my website, because I'm actually, in tandem with our conversation, retooling my own journey a little bit with my vocation and my
Yeah.
career.
Awesome. Yes.
But certainly, and you can certainly find me on Facebook, Lenore
Yeah.
Walker Art Therapy page, but also just Lenore Walker.
Yeah, seriously,
You,
connect with Lenore and her story, because it's a great journey, and you'll find yourself in it. But let me ask you, so as you go throughout this journey, maybe maybe sort of like Hansel and Gretel in a good way, not a bad way, but you pick up stuff along the way, not on the way to the witch's house, hopefully,
no,
but
no,
not on the way to
although
the
the
witch's house.
witch
Uh,
has something, she's helpful.
well, there may,
She's an
yes,
ally in disguise.
that's maybe true. So then my little word picture. So what little crumbs have you picked up on your journey along the way to the witch's house? That
Yeah,
you
so
tools, crumbs that have become tools that you use in your life and in the lives of others.
Yeah, so creative expression has really been the big lifesaver for me. I started getting into worship arts when I was in the pastorate. And then when I got out of it, I did a career reassessment, because I was so disillusioned with what happened there and disenfranchised, that I decided to do this career consulting with a coach. And what we found out is that I'd never really used these creative abilities,
Hmm.
and that maybe a career using those would be helpful. So I pursued that and went whole hog into becoming a certified decorative artisan. And that included doing, what at the time were called decorative finishes or faux finishes. But what I did was highly skilled. I was trained by people who painted for the royal household, and, just had the most exciting time getting to know myself as a creative and as a maker. And how that evolved was then I was asked to start teaching art classes. So I became an art educator. And with my previous religious education degree, it was interesting. There was this intersection of spirituality and creative self-expression, very soul-based. And what I started finding in my students as I was teaching them is that they would have these experiences in an art class of coming to a critical crossroads where there would be a meltdown of sorts in class, just using the fundamentals of art making, just in a simple, I'm going to teach you how to use oils, I'm going to teach you how to use acrylics, or whatever it was we were working with, drawing skills, color theory. And I started to notice that old pastoral part of me kind of grokking up again. And I realized there's something here, something big is happening. I had already experienced that personally in my own creative expression time. I was painting my own paintings, sculpting, knitting. You know, I have an old friend who taught me how to knit in high school, and I took that back up, and it actually was a guy, you know, which is kind of unorthodox. But all of this creative self-expression, I started to realize this is a lifesaver for people. There's something happening here. What is it? What was it for me? And really it was to increase my contemplative, meditative experience with source energy, God, as I understood God, and feel that intimacy and that consolation and that sense of being held by that larger entity and being kept safe. But I realized the same kind of energy was kind of dropping into the art class space over these lovely people. And I started coming alongside naturally and asking, you know, can you tell me what's going on here? Which is a very therapeutic way of approaching teaching. And I actually think that's the best way to teach, you know, is to create that open yet bounded space for people where they can encounter the teacher within, or the therapist within, or whatever within, you know. So on the journey to the witch's house, what I was hearing from people were cancer journeys and life-limiting illnesses, and they were taking an art class to kind of offset the stressors of experiencing that. They were well enough to enter an art class, or all kinds of things were coming up. And I started realizing that the action of making and holding the tool in your hand, or even just using your hands directly on substrate using the media, was quite liberating for people. And in a sense, yes, triggered deep emotional content, but allowed it to surface in a way that this challenging energy, much like the witch, becomes an ally in disguise. And that is a very Jungian concept in psychology, very soul-based, very honoring that deep within every human being, where your wound is where your greatest genius lies. But actually, where your wound is where the revelation of your wholeness is. And that's what Dr. Jung actually believed. And I really loved that, because I felt like, in terms of the greatest spiritual traditions, the best coaching and counseling and teaching I ever received, that lined up with it. And so my curiosity was stimulated about, how can I merge this creative expression with something therapeutic, because I'm seeing that natural connection. And so after quite a search, didn't take too long, I landed on the field of art psychotherapy and decided that I would like to begin training in that field so that I could actually help people using these alternate modalities to do that deep work in a much more holistic, healing way that actually honored that there might be something connected to soul or spirit in the human condition, that for those who desired that larger story connection in their localized kind of narrative, would help them to heal. And the beauty of that is that now we know, from all the neuroscience discoveries that have come out in the last 20 years, especially as that research that was going on has been published, that these kinds of making activities, or creative self-expression, body-based awareness, movement, all are the natural human capacities for healing ourselves.
Hmm.
And this is what this therapeutic profession is grounded in. And we have a number of people who were cohorts of Dr. Young who really started to realize that this came from ancient shamanic healing tradition, and that knowledge was now being delivered in a more clinical stream, so that there was some evidentiary-based outcome to support that this actually is a legitimate healing modality.
Hmm. It's fascinating. For sure there is another Uncork conversation in our future because I want to talk more about the neuroscience of all this because that is a very fascinating subject to me. But for sake of time, we won't braille all the way into that. But as you talk about just what's happening for people there, and even the place that our own darkness plays, our own shadow, as I think Young said, plays in
Absolutely.
our journey. I was thinking about something that you were saying about, again, it's just so we stumbled upon this Hansel Gretel witch thing because it wasn't something we were going to talk about. But from a theological perspective, it's interesting because you said our wholeness lies in that darkness somehow. I think it's Luther who said, never forget that, if from a Christian tradition, obviously, Luther understood or believed there was a devil. And I believe one of his famous quotes is, never forget the devil is God's devil. And there's this sense in which, again, if we believe in the devil, or the devil exemplifies sort of something to us, is the exoneration. It's just this sense of darkness or whatever in our life, is that it has the power to also work for us if we understand. And
Absolutely.
that's the really interesting thing that happens in this play of light and darkness, which again tips into creativity. And what I love about I follow you on social media, and I get a chance. You post a lot of your art there, and I get a chance, and it's the interplay of light and how that goes. And I have a friend of mine who I will do a conversation with in the future, who's an abstract artist and typically paints in black and white, and just the play of light and darkness and how all this works. And who I never would have thought growing up, based on where I grew up, that I'd be interested in these things. But these things hold fascination for me now because I'm maturing and learning in my own journey about things that I never would have explored or understood. And that is another example. I would never be where I am if I didn't have the difficulties of the past. The difficulties of the past have brought me to the place that I am. And as much as they are difficult and I don't like them, and I really wished a lot of them didn't happen, they are fundamentally part of me and have made me who I am, and have great opportunity within them if I really bear down and understand that. And the disciplines that you're learning and the foundations you're putting under it are the kind of things that help people find that light within the darkness, which is so very
Absolutely.
powerful to me.
Totally. It's like my own personal word, I should probably register it as a trademark, is soul archaeology.
Hmm.
I came on that term a long time ago when I was doing my own art making as a healing journey, because it was so satisfying and relieving to me, and a way that I actually started praying when I felt so disenfranchised from religious organizations because of what had happened to me, and so left abandoned and betrayed. And it was the art making that actually gave me another avenue by which I could meditate, contemplate, connect with God as I understood God, my own spirit, and my own sense of what I was doing here and why I was here. And it's incredibly redemptive. Now, not everybody feels the need to have that part of um, life experience so emphasized. But I must say, my training in art therapy is specialized in a couple of areas. One in hospice care or life-limiting chronic illness, bereavement, and loss, which I got to kind of put into real bona fide practice 5.5 years ago, well, 7 years ago, when my sister was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and died way before her time. And walking through that, but also addiction recovery, because it was of interest to me because of the family I grew up in, not necessarily because there was substance abuse, but there was addictive behavior all the time. And I find these two areas incredibly fascinating because it is the making process and the connection to some kind of larger story, kind of archetypal narrative that helps people make sense of the local personal journey that they are going through. And I'm finding, especially with the pandemic, that the people who I counsel who do not have any sense of that kind of larger archetype, be it God, Christ, Buddha, whatever you want to call it, struggle so much more because shadow becomes such a source of despair that it actually swallows them up and kind of ratchets them down into this dark hole that breaks them and fractures them and fragments them to such degree that they feel there's no coming back. And so you get a lot of suicidal ideation, even planning suicide. And I really like to talk openly about that because we want to have conversations too about what it means to stay. How can you stay? How can you make sense of this deep darkness? Where can you find the vein of gold? You know, there's so much more I could say about that, but I'll have to stop at that.
No, I'm sure you could. And it's fascinating. I love the term that you use, like archaeology, because when we think about it, I'm fascinated by archaeology. I like watching shows about that. The reality is the only thing that remains is in the story of men and women is what they created. So buildings or art or cave paintings, whatever it is. So it's this very thing in essence that becomes our forever story. It's what we unearth 2,000 years later. It's the things that were created and left behind. So there clearly is an interconnection there. So let me ask you this question, and we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes. But I just want so along the way, I'm sure you've found a hero or a heroine or two, someone who just really inspired you. And I'd like you just to think of one person that you would say, hey, that's a hero to me. And this is why. This is why they are a hero to me, and what I see in them or what they taught me.
Yeah, I'd have to say, I'll just list my favorites and
Yeah,
but I'll key in on the one.
yeah.
Hildegard von Bingen. If you haven't found out about her, find out about her. Amazing. Rhineland mystic. President Theodore Roosevelt. Dag Hammarskjöld. Meister Eckhart, but really from a young age, Indira Gandhi, who was the only female prime minister of India, and to this day was the only female prime minister of India. And I was growing up, and remember, we were watching world events on our television sets because most of our parents like to tune into the evening news, and I lived close in Southern Ontario to Buffalo, New York. So there was always a Western New York American station on right around dinner time. And my parents faithfully watched the news at the end of supper. And we were exposed to the Vietnam War. So vicarious trauma coming right into the home. But also I learned about Indira Gandhi very early on because she was at that time, 1966 to 1977, Prime Minister of India. She also had another term later. But she was an interesting woman. I won't say she was perfect. That was a very complex political and social situation. But her desire to elevate the poor and to take back agribusiness at the very beginning of that whole movement in India is quite profoundly moving because she was really going against the flow at the time. But she said something incredibly wise. And I found it out, I think it was when I was in Bible college. And it's never left me. And she said, you must learn to be still in the midst of activity and vibrantly alive in repose. And I think here again is the bridge between picture window to the sublime and life on the street. That in that restful repose state, that there's a vibrancy, a vivification that happens as you connect there. But then you go into that active world, and that stillness that you get in that sublime moment of reconnecting is how you stay connected when all hell is breaking loose. And I mean, if you look at the context in which Indira Gandhi was prime minister, all hell was breaking loose all the time. And in the end, she wound up being assassinated in 1984. You know, it's quite a fascinating journey. And I would say, though, that I found it kind of unique. I might have been a strange child, but I remember being quite young and thinking, who is that woman floating across the TV screen? There was an enigmatic, kind of charismatic aura, so to speak, around her. And I think it was this repose. There was always this ability to carry the light. And that really touched me because of my key vision when I was a little girl. I really was learning how to become a portable environment of light and grace. And that's actually what my name means. You know, so I'm lucky. I have a good name. And I think it was given to me maybe from that archetypal energy through my mom and my dad, because somewhere something knew I was going to need that to keep me grounded, you know, to live as that portable environment of grace, to try to bring that light where there was shadow and chaos and challenge.
Where the light shines and has its most effect is in that place of utter darkness. I remember years ago going to the caves, the Kentucky caves, with my family. I traveled there as a kid. Went there back with my family. I remember going down this cave, and hundreds of feet deep, and they turn off all the lights, and you cannot literally see your hand in front of your face. It's frightening. And then just a crack of little light, all of a sudden, as your eyes adjust, that light dispels ultimate darkness. Although it's still dark, now you can see this is the power for all of us. So listen, the sort of the arc of my podcast is this idea of uncommodification, of taking things that are commodities in our life, and sometimes even ourselves, because we get acceptance from being a commodity, fitting in, sitting down, shutting up, standing in line, making sure everything's consistent across and homogeneous. So my question to you, Lenore, I mean, obviously you're a person of great uniqueness, but what is uncommodifying? Standing up and standing out for all the right reasons in the world you live in today. What does that really look like? What is being an uncommodified person? Because clearly you are. What does that look like?
It's really about being soul-based. You know, I think being less reticent about coming out wholeheartedly and just authentically saying that where before maybe I would kind of modify that the life of soul is actually what I think. I actually think our bodies are in our souls. I think this life that we're living is actually a soul life. You know, that's just me. But becoming less ashamed about saying that and realizing that grokking that is really, that's a science fiction term from Robert A. Heinlein that I love, that he coined. You know, it's about having that deep empathetic rapport as a result of completely embodied connection with the essence of who you are, and living that out as seamlessly and naturally in your day-to-day life as possible. You know, in Christian circles, they call that a lifestyle of worship, you know, and I think the question that comes to me every day about how I can do that, and I'm really revisiting that more intently these days as we come to the end of, you know, this very interesting year, 2020. I'm asking myself, what has purpose and meaning for me? And that would be the question that I would offer. But the sub question that maybe is a little more prickly, that I think helps guide me to answering that question on a daily basis, is more, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And it's about fear of not fulfilling that role. You know, Jung was very good at helping people appreciate their ego and their persona, the masks that we wear, the roles we adopt, because that's the way we first learn how to fit into the societal culture and structure that we're a part of, the familial system. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when those get over invested in and over exaggerated, they beat up on us pretty good. And at that point, it's a cue from soul to say, or psyche to say, who are we really about here? Who are we really? And how can we redefine those roles and recalibrate them, maybe retire some of those in favor of allowing essence to float up into this seamless, integrated way that we grok it out, and really becoming who I really am. And so if I weren't afraid of fulfilling that role, if I could set that aside just for a moment, what would I really be doing? How would I be going about, what has purpose and meaning for me?
Yep. No, that's powerful, and it's the I'm coming to learn for myself that this idea that I've been brailing for about 12 years now. This idea of uncommodification. I've used this in business. I've used it in other places, but I've become more interested in applying it personally in the last 10 years. Is that fear is the thing. It's a cage. Fear is a cage that will imprison my uniqueness. I can't surrender to my uniqueness in the cage of fear. It just doesn't happen for me. And the more fearless I become about being who I am, who intrinsically is good, it is part of my own journey for sure. So listen, as we wrap up, just one final opportunity I want to give you to just encourage and challenge our listeners. So what's the last thing that you would like people to be encouraged about, or to think about, or challenged about as we finish this conversation today? Lenore, if you're speaking directly to them as individuals, what is it you want to say to them?
Find something to believe in. Find something that is your go-to, the thing you can cling to, but the thing, and maybe the thing you can run to, but the thing that really does support you, the thing that encourages you, the thing that teaches and guides you, the thing that empowers you, the thing that allows you to be a portable environment of whatever it is that you feel like you want to bring. For me lately, I've been leaning into a Vedic goddess called Kodiyar Ma, and her name means she who is never not broken. And here again, a reminder that the broken, fragmented parts of us are actually the things that allow us to rise. And she's illustrated as riding the back of a crocodile. This strong beast who could take you down and thrash you in that dark void I was talking about a few moments ago. And yet she rules because she is never not broken, because she's able to face the fracturing and fragmentation and to still come through it whole. And it's that very fracturing, or that feeling of being fragmented, of facing your shadow, facing your fear, that allows you to be, encouraged, taught, empowered to live with purpose and meaning no matter what. And so I think it's that I wonder, how would you grok the croc? How would you be so completely connected to yourself that you can ride the back of that shadow and find it your ally, and then see it tutoring you, so to speak, or guiding you and mentoring you into how you can more fully be that portable environment of whatever it is that you feel is most meaningful and purposeful, that you have to bring, that only you can bring, because nobody else will do it quite like you.
Well, Lenore, just first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. It's absolutely inspiring. And thank you for encouraging me to pick up that pen 30 plus years ago, because that pen was an instrument of healing for me. And I appreciate that so much. And just what really, for me, as I think about the conversation today, a powerful, a mystical kind of conversation, all of the mystery and magic of the things that we've talked about, yet very practical. One level, we look out the back window into the light, and then we face the street, and that's a great metaphor that I think
That's the metaphor for today.
we found it in this conversation. And that's the thing I love about these conversations, is as much as we have a bit of a framework for them, they find their organic moment. when I sent you an email to prepare for this conversation, as I do everyone, I say to people in that email, the conversation what we're supposed to have will find us. And today, Lenore, I think the conversation that we were supposed to have, maybe it's just for you and I, that's okay. Or maybe it's for thousands of others. We found the conversation I believe that we were supposed to have. And so my encouragement as we finish up, my encouragement to you as my listeners, as my friends, my growing community of uncommodified people, as you consider and ponder this conversation, ask yourself, what does this conversation mean to you? Why are you joining us today? Why did you listen today? And then how should you respond and act on what you heard? Find ways to distill this and activate it. And as you do, here's I ask of you. Email me at tim@theuncommodified.com or connect with me on social media and let Lenore and I know how you're uncorking all this on the canvas of your life.